and the City of London is a private corporation which occupies 677 acres, which extends all the way from Buckingham Palace up to Fleet Street and the CBD and across to Parliament buildings and all around that area. And these people also have the Bank of England. And we know that the Bank of England is a very secretive place. But the Queen went down with the Duke and they went down to the Bank of England and had a look around. So let's see now what they saw at the Bank of England.
In the City of London, it's money that normally does the talking. But on their visit to the Bank of England, it was what the Queen and Duke of Edinburgh said that has got everyone chatting. After having been guided through the bank's gold vault, the Queen finally got an answer to a question she controversially posed 4 years ago. Here at a visit to the London School of Economics in 2008, she was heard asking why nobody noticed the economic downturn coming. Back to today, and
he and his group here are going to answer your question from 4 years ago, why nobody saw the crisis coming.
And after a brief explanation, another question, this time from the Duke.
There's not another one coming.
But the Queen, it seemed, was engaged and had plenty to say on the matter.
I suppose in money terms, it is very difficult to foresee. But people have got a bit lax, you know? Complacency.
And then a question about the city's regulator.
Yes, because the financial service, what do they call themselves? The regulator.
Financial Services
Authority, which was really quite new, wasn't it? Really. But it didn't have any teeth or something.
These are sensitive issues, and while couched largely in question form, the comments may be seen as interference.
She's asking the sort of questions that anybody else would ask. Anybody who is in business, anybody who is suffering as a result of the credit squeeze, anybody who is in debt, anybody who really is struggling, they would ask the same questions. It just so happens it was the Queen at the Bank of England. She had a captive audience in the very people that run the economy, so why not ask the questions?
In this case, the questions have resulted in a statement from the Financial Services Authority, in which they say, "We've widely acknowledged that the regulatory approach before the financial crisis in 2008 was flawed and has since been completely changed. Parliament is now awaiting royal assent for the Financial Services Bill." Like it or not, the Queen isn't just about handshakes and bouquets. What she says carries a lot of value. How much of an impact these comments will have is the million-pound question. Paul Harrison, Sky News.
So good on Queen Elizabeth and the Duke for asking about how they can prevent another financial crisis. But we know that the real owners of the Bank of England are the Rothschilds. And so let's have a look now to see how the Rothschilds took control of the Bank of England during the Napoleonic Wars.
I think the edge over families like the Barings with whom they were competing was that they had their brothers in very important financial centres and countries. Now, whether that was premeditated, whether they thought that through as they got out of the ghetto, it's hard to believe that they went as far as that. But that's what happened, and once they saw that it was an advantage, they worked on that advantage.
In March 1815, Napoleon returned to Paris from exile in Elba, determined to revive his imperial ambitions. The Rothschilds immediately ramped up their gold operation, buying up all the bullion and coins they could lay their hands on. Nathan's reason for buying this huge stock of gold was simple. He assumed that, as with all Napoleon's wars, this would be a long one. His gold would be more and more sought after, and it would rise in value. It proved to be a near fatal miscalculation. Wellington famously called the Battle of Waterloo the nearest run thing you ever saw in your life. After a day of brutal charges, countercharges, and heroic defense, the late arrival of the Prussian army finally proved decisive. For Wellington, it was a glorious victory. But not for the Rothschilds. No doubt it was gratifying to Nathan Rothschild to be the first to hear the news of Napoleon's defeat. thanks to the swiftness of the Rothschild couriers, he heard it fully 48 hours before Major Henry Percy delivered Wellington's official dispatch to the British cabinet. But no matter how early he heard it, the news from Waterloo was anything but good from Nathan's point of view. He had bargained for something much more protracted. Now he and his brothers were sitting on top of a pile of cash that nobody wanted to pay for a war that was over. With the coming of peace, the great armies that had fought Napoleon could be disbanded. That meant no more gold for soldiers' wages, and it meant the price of gold, which had soared during the war, would fall. Nathan was faced with heavy and growing losses. There was only one possible way out. Nathan could use the Rothschild gold to make a massive and hugely risky bet on the bond market. On July the 20th, 1815, the evening edition of the London Courier reported that Nathan had made great purchases of stock, meaning British government bonds. Nathan's gamble was that the British victory at Waterloo would send the price of British bonds soaring upwards. Nathan bought, and as the price of bonds began to rise, he kept on buying. Despite his brother's desperate entreaties to sell, Nathan held his nerve for another year. Eventually, in July 1817, with bond prices up by 40%, he sold his holding. His profits were worth approximately £600 million today. The Rothschilds had shown that bonds were more than just a way for governments to fund their wars. They could also be bought and sold in a way that generated serious money. And with money came power.
And so there's two great ironies of the Queen and the Duke asking those questions to those officials at the Bank of England. First of all, the owners of the Bank of England were absent, and how often does a Queen visit a place where the owners aren't out there to greet the Queen? But also that these owners own all the subsidiaries around the world which form the banking cartels which caused the crash in the first place.
Starting as early as 2007, currency traders at several multinational banks formed a group that they dubbed the cartel. It's perhaps fitting that they chose that name, as it aptly describes the brazenly illegal behavior that they were engaged in on a near 5-year basis. Almost every day, for more than 5 years, traders in this cartel used a private electronic chat room to manipulate the spot market's exchange rate between euros and dollars, using coded language to conceal their collusion. They acted as partners rather than competitors in an effort to push the exchange rate in directions favorable to their banks but detrimental to many others. Now, the prices the market sets for those currencies influence virtually every sector of every economy in the world. Their actions inflated the bank's profits while harming countless consumers, investors, and institutions around the globe, from pension funds to major corporations, and including the bank's own customers, who placed their faith in the market and relied on it to produce a competitive exchange rate. As a result of our investigation, 4 of the world's largest banks have agreed to plead guilty to felony antitrust violations. They are Citicorp, JP Morgan Chase & Company, Barclays PLC, and the Royal Bank of Scotland PLC.
And so you'll notice that none of the directors of the cartel of these international bankers went to jail and paid the price for what they did. In fact, the American government bailed out the banks.